Many airlines are replacing large jets with small commuter planes. It's a move that has made flying more difficult, even dangerous for people with disabilities. Hello and welcome to another edition of DNet, the Disability Network. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. Today we'll hear how the move to smaller commuter aircraft is making life even more frustrating for disabled travelers. We'll look at a potential solution to the problem, a prototype lift designed by a firm in Winnipeg.
And we'll hear about successful job hunting strategies from disabled employees.
And what's happening at the cutting edge of design? We'll take a look at kitchen utensils and how they can be adapted for people with disabilities. But first, here's this week's roundup of disability news.
Yukon Premier Tony Penniket has shuffled his cabinet and added a new minister. That new member is Whitehorse South MLA Joyce Hayden. Hayden, who is legally blind, becomes the Health and Human Resources Minister. She will also handle the Yukon Housing Corporation portfolio. Hayden doesn't expect her blindness to impede her ability to do her job. She says, "It's unusual for a person with my disability to be appointed to cabinet, but I've learned to compensate."
An Edmonton woman is accusing the Alberta government of balancing its budget on the backs of poor, disabled persons. The disabled woman is getting support in her claim that the Alberta government has no right to deduct money from her provincial benefit payments, deductions which she says leave her with almost nothing to live on.
59 years old, a diabetic, a bad heart, and severe asthma. But Roberta Duvall is in a fighting mood.
We can't afford to let the government walk on us and step on us any longer, because they might better put us up and shoot us instead of slowly starving us to death. And this is what the whole story is.
Like many disabled Albertans, Duvall qualifies for assistance under an Alberta government program for the severely handicapped. But Duvall and many others don't get the maximum monthly allowance. That's because Duvall also gets money from Canada Pension, and the Alberta government deducts her pension money from their program.
And I don't feel the Alberta government has the right to take my money away from me that I worked hard and had to save, compulsory mind you, but that didn't bother me any, but it was my money I had to save. And for them to turn around and put their hand in my pocket and say, "I'm sorry, Roberta, you can't have that, we need it." Well, to me, that's an insult.
Duvall says to add insult, the province is now deducting cost of living increases from her Canada Pension check. Money the province used to let her keep, but not anymore. So now, even though her two pensions add up to $1,265 a month, her living allowance is being capped at $755. That's $755 for rent, food, and clothing. 2 years ago, Duvall took the province to court over this issue, but lost when a judge said she wasn't entitled to collect two disability pensions at the same time. Now Duvall is appealing that decision, arguing once again that her Canada Pension doesn't involve taxpayers' dollars and therefore is rightfully hers. Rick Pogusky, CBC News, Edmonton.
The Ontario government is moving toward implementation of employment equity legislation for disabled people and other target groups. Citizenship Minister Elaine Ziemba said this week that the NDP government is giving priority to expanding employment equity to all job sectors. A ministry spokesperson also says that a commissioner for employment equity has been selected and will be announced within weeks.
Some companies are initiating employment equity well in advance of government legislation. That's the case with Loblaws Ontario division, known as National Grocers Limited. It has 27,000 employees across Ontario in supermarkets such as Zehrs, Loblaws, and Fortinos. National hopes to set 5-year targets for disabled people and other minorities in the next few months. But while the goal is to increase opportunities, there are no plans to set quotas for the hiring of disabled persons. Outreach and access opportunities will be used instead.
Visually impaired people in Montreal have access to a new interactive phone service. The information bulletin service is called Vox, and it's run by the CNIB. The service is available in English and French to anyone with a touch-tone telephone. This is just a telephone for those with vision, but for blind Canadians, this is now the link to a vast array of resources. By simply dialing one number, callers can access the latest information on visual impairment and even some practical advice on treating blindness. Information bulletins on Vox will be updated regularly. The number to call to access Vox is area code 514-285-4622 in Montreal.
And that's this week's roundup of disability news. Last week we brought you a story on the Globe and Mail Style Guide, a handbook for editors and reporters, including specific use of language for disabilities. This week we came across this illustration in the Globe and Mail. It depicts a group of people who are blindfolded by American flags, with the exception of one individual. The headline reads, "An outsider in the country of the blind." We asked blind consumer Cindy Burley what impact headlines such as this have on blind people.
It leaves an impression that people who are actually blind or visually impaired are unaware. And that is definitely a stereotypical attitude that seems to have persisted over the centuries and in some cases still exists today.
As you can see, the battle to keep negative images of disabled persons out of the media is unending.
Coming up, getting off the ground. If you're traveling for business reasons or just on vacation, flying is often the quickest and most convenient way of reaching your destination. But for people with disabilities, the trip to the airport can be filled with anticipation. Is the airline or airport really prepared to accommodate your needs? For people with disabilities, access to large airplanes at major airports has improved greatly with the introduction of telescoping boarding ramps. But many airlines are turning to smaller commuter aircraft. Passengers have to board from the tarmac, a situation that's inconvenient, even dangerous for people with disabilities. In 1988, on a trip to Toronto from North Bay, Cindy Trottier had problems getting in and out of a Canadian partner, Ontario Express commuter flight.
It was not only very embarrassing, but was physically injured somewhat, and since then I just have not taken a flight because I've been afraid using smaller commuter aircraft and getting boarded and deplaned again.
The plane was a 19-seat Jetstream 31, and she had to be carried aboard by untrained personnel.
When I was carried on, originally it was in the form of a fireman's lift, which is, as you know, 3 aside, and we couldn't get into the doorway, and my position had to be shifted in midair to the top of the stairs so that there was one in front and one behind to get into the plane. And as you can see, then there was problems when I got into Toronto. There was argument over whose job it was to deplane me, so there were some problems there. And then for my flight to come back to North Bay, I was originally refused to be able to go back on the plane. And it wasn't until I mentioned that I would contact the Secretary of State and about the problems that not taking me back to North Bay that I was allowed back on the plane.
Ms. Trottier made a complaint to the National Transportation Agency. Karen Loughlin is the Director of Transportation Services for disabled persons with the agency.
The National Transportation Agency ordered Canadian Partner to make its transportation system accessible to persons with disabilities.
And the airline has complied. Previously, they turned down people with disabilities who wanted to fly on Jetstream 31s. Now they're training staff to carry people on board, a situation that's looked on as a compromise by passengers and staff. Priscilla LeBlanc is the manager of public relations for Ontario Express.
Well, we complied, of course, and we have since November 16th of 1990. We have some concerns about being requested to carry on a disabled person without the technological equipment readily available to assist us to do that.
In limited headroom, to lift her up to back.
A technological device designed for just that purpose was demonstrated in Toronto recently. The combination of a chair and a lift was designed by Just Mobility of Winnipeg. It can be used on the de Havilland Dash 8 and the Jetstream 31. Doug Ariu is a member of the design team.
Originally, we built a lift for the aircraft going into my hometown, and we thought it was a one-of, and we started having people phoning us from all over North America saying that we were the experts in this field. Initially, we were very humble and we said we weren't, and after a while we saw a business opportunity and said yes, we were. And we immediately started having interplay with the Regional Airline Association in the United States, the Paralyzed Veterans, and other lobby groups down there that were trying to force the bureaucracy in the United States to put together the regulations to go with the Air Carrier Access Act. We saw that as a business opportunity, and we basically spent 4 very interesting years working with the disabled community to create what you see here today.
Now, lift your arms up.
Aside from the lift's design considerations, the other factor that has to be dealt with is cost. The chair will cost around $1,500. The lift, $20,000 to $25,000. Who will pay the bill? Howard Goldberg is the vice president of the Air Transportation Association of Canada, an airline lobby group.
Airlines don't have any money. Our passengers have money. We get it from our passengers and distribute it around. And so if the airlines are going to pay for it, it's going to have to come out of fares. If Transport Canada buys them and we have to rent them, we don't know how that will work. We just have to wait and see what the final price is. Our big concern is that it's because of the hub and spoke nature of these services, it's not the hub where you'll have 2 or 3 of these devices. It's at every spoke. You're going to need to have one because people, once getting on the airplane, are going to have to get off. And so what's the nature of that cost, and how many airports are we talking about, and who owns those airports, and what's if it's a municipality or it's the federal government or the province, and what's their commitment to this, a partnership, I hope, of some sort. But who's going to pay? Don't know until we see what the cost is and what its impact will be.
It's a real tough call. I mean, we have an act of Parliament that says that Canadian transporters cannot pose undue obstacles to the mobility of people with disabilities. That would suggest perhaps that it's a carrier responsibility.
Where does this leave passengers like Cindy Trache, while the bugs in design and funding are being worked out? She recommends that personnel receive not only physical training, but sensitivity training as well.
One of the comments I got in Toronto was, it's not my job to take a crip off the plane. And I was floored. I was shocked with just that kind of attitude.
In your opinion, how do you think the airline industry in Canada could become more accessible?
There's a number of things that can be done. I think it's a matter of looking at different technology available, trying different prototypes as we've seen today, looking at aircraft design, airline policies, as well as training of personnel.
I can only assure you that Ontario Express would not purchase another aircraft without ensuring that we had an acceptable method of boarding all categories of disabled people. I think the activists within the disabled organizations have done a very good job of raising awareness, and that the likelihood that a manufacturer will be able to sell or further design equipment without enhanced accessibility to the handicapped is now taken care of.
Joe, you tried both the chair and the lift. How would you rate the design for boarding the Dash 8?
The lift is great. It works perfectly on the Dash 8. What I was a little concerned about was that the chair is only 11 inches wide, so I felt a little constrained and a little uncomfortable because I got some balance problems with
You're a
side
big
to side.
guy.
And I'm a big guy, yeah. But if they could probably use a bigger chair on the Dash 8 aircraft because the aisleways are 15 inches wide there.
Now, the Jetstream, the person getting into that, it didn't look quite as easy. How would you rate the design?
Yeah, I'd feel pretty, the design of the chair and the lift is quite fine, but I think there needs to be some fundamental changes to the aircraft itself.
I agree. Coming up next, how to find that job. It can be tough and sometimes discouraging trying to break into today's job market. But for people with disabilities who think the problem through, there are employment opportunities out there. Our next 3 guests have advice on how to develop a job search strategy. Orly Corcus is a customer sales representative at Cantel. Brenda Desmarais is a retail sales clerk at the Sunnybrook Centre for Independent Living. And Derek Giles is a financial administrative assistant with the Employment and Immigration Commission. They spoke with Joe earlier.
You've all been successful job seekers. Are there strategies and tips that you can give other potential job seekers out there. Mr. Giles, let's start with you.
The first tip is that you regard working for a job as a job, and you have to work as hard at it as you would at your job. You have to think smart, you have to use your imagination, and show the same positive attitude that you would expect to show to an employer to make him want to hire you.
What kinds of, when you use your imagination, what kinds of things did you come up with to make sure that you got a job?
Oh, the skills you have and how they might apply. Whether it's using a typewriter converts to a computer, whether you've done some bookkeeping converts to inventory controls or accounts payable or purchasing department. You can transfer skills from one area to another. You can then convince an employer that you can contribute to his effort by your effort.
Some of the job strategies, search skills that you employ. Ms. Corcus, let's ask your opinion on this.
In my situation, I, first of all, compiled a successful, what I thought was a successful resume that included a lot of background. And other than just mailing it off to different companies, I got involved in knowing what's out there, in finding out if there were any open houses and any employment equity conferences. I made a lot of cold calls to different companies, and as well made follow-up calls to the companies to which I sent my resume.
Ms. Demery, what's your strategy, or what was your strategy?
I think just remaining positive, reminding yourself that there are going to be rejections, and if there are rejections, pick yourself back up and carry on. You're the same as any able-bodied person out there. They've got rejected. You just have to keep going, otherwise you don't end up with a job. So I guess just stay positive.
Now, you wheel into a prospective employer's office and automatically they see a lot of dollars being spent to accommodate you. How do you overcome those kinds of fears?
Well, I think being straightforward, first of all. I ask them if they have any questions about my disability that they would feel comfortable asking me at the time of the interview. I tell them right away that I don't walk, because that's usually the first question, that, do you walk? So I tell them right away I don't walk, but answer any questions they might have, tell them that I don't need any specialized equipment and that I'm willing to work with what they have and be cooperative. I think that's a big thing, is being cooperative and not demanding that they have these changes right away, especially if you're new and they don't have a lot of dealings with people who are disabled.
Ms. Corcus, is appearance important?
Presenting yourself in a fashionable and clean way is very important, and I think that means a lot to an employer.
How do you do that if you're somebody like yourself who can't see?
Basically, I've had a lot of support with friends going out shopping and choosing out clothes, as well as I guess I feel personally, just because I can't see, it does not mean I can't imagine and coordinate my colors and do my hair and my makeup in the morning as anyone else could.
Good, thank you. Mr. Giles, quickly, how do people go out and find jobs? Are there some solid strategies that you've had in your experience?
Solid strategies. You talk to everybody you can think of in your family, community. You should start out being involved in the community as much as possible. Form networks, talk to them. You use a coherent, planned, methodical job search strategy. As Orly said, follow-up calls, be persistent, show employers that you are interested in working and you're determined to work.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.
If you have any tips that you'd like to share with viewers, write to us. We'll give you our address at the end of the show.
Coming up, eating utensils, food for thought. You don't usually associate kitchen utensils with state-of-the-art design, But even though many of the items are inexpensive, if they're well designed, they can make life easier for people with disabilities.
Richard Dargis, project officer with the Program Technology Branch of the Ontario Ministry of Community and Social Services, is back again this week to demonstrate.
Here we have a display of kitchen utensils and eating utensils. Here we have a two-handed mug that's easier for a lot of people to lift and to use. Then we have a plate with a lip on it that's good because you can push a spoon into the edge of the plate and put the food onto the spoon without having to use two hands. All of the cutlery has large handles, and as you can see, the placemat is a different color. That's particularly good for people who have low vision because they may not be able to detect where the edge of the plate is if that were a white placemat. So that helps a lot. Then over here, we have an interesting device that's again a regular consumer item. It's a salt and pepper shaker. You shake the salt and you squeeze it to grind the pepper. So particularly handy for people who have trouble making that twisting motion that most salt and pepper shakers require. Over here we have another sort of specialized item. It's a pizza cutter that's been given a large handle, and some people could use that as a knife to cut not steak, but they could cut meatloaf or vegetables or other things by simply rollering over them rather than having to make that sawing motion that the knife requires. This last item here is a regular consumer's item. It's a potato peeler that has a nice large handle and yet is particularly lightweight. And again, very, very easy to come by. Most kitchen gadget stores sell it, and it's very inexpensive as well.
It looks like good design doesn't have to be expensive.
That's right. A couple of weeks ago, we ran a piece on animal research. We received a lot of mail with a lot of different viewpoints.
This is a letter from Amanda Allen from Colville in the state of Washington. She's 12 years old and she writes, "I think it's stupid and dumb to kill dogs for research. I think research labs can find other ways. Dogs are fun-loving pets. I should know. I have 2 of them. Dogs can be used for other things, like training them for seeing eye dogs, watch dogs, or loving cute house dogs. What those research labs are doing is all murder."
And this letter is from John Harold of Regina, Saskatchewan, who writes, "We should allow animals to be used in medical research. However, we must have very good controls in place to prevent abuse. Animals must not be used for germ or gas war tests, cosmetics, and the like. They must be treated in the most humane way possible with little or no pain."
Here's another letter from an Ontario viewer who is against animal research. "I am outraged and heartbroken that the public and government allows this to continue. I think it is immoral and downright cruel. By the way, I too am handicapped, but I am not afraid to speak out, to fight for the rights of animals who have no one to plead for them."
And finally, this letter comes to us from Kathleen Brown, who lives in Alberta. "How many mothers with a pet dog and a 1-year-old child dying of congenital heart disease would say, 'No, I will not allow the surgical procedure to be done first on my dog so that my child can live'? An oversimplification perhaps, but my 1-year-old daughter had life-saving open-heart surgery that is presently available because of its testing and success with animals."
And that's our show. I'm Joe Coughlin.
And I'm Susan Pettit. See you again next week.
And here's our address: the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. That's the Disability Network, CBC, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. And our fax number is area code 416-975-5636.